Evening or afternoon, or maybe even morning, depending on where you're joining us from. We have another great Money Monday and another great speaker. So, oftentimes we have people who are interested in investing in real estate and getting started. And it's always that first hump that's probably the scariest in terms of, can I afford it? Right now, you're probably hearing horror stories about people who aren't paying, all those kind of things. But you really want to make sure that you have a great partner to get started. And I want to say I am honored to have our guest today because not only is he an expert, but he is my personal expert who I've used, leaned on, called, and cried to on a number of occasions. So I want to thank you so much for joining us. Let me read a little bit about Donnell. A Southern gentleman at heart, Donnell received his formal education in Virginia, and upon graduating from the College of William and Mary, he moved to Washington, D.C., where he began his career in financial services. From retail banking, branch management, to investment banking, to insurance services, he mastered the skills necessary to advise his clients on the best strategies to managing their financial portfolios. He obtained his real estate license in 2001. Drawing from his financial background and personal experience, Donnell is able to advise his clients on the best options for locating, financing, renovating their properties for personal use or investment purposes. And it's key to understand the financial process in that. He's happy to share his contracts with his clients and sphere of influence so that they have the same access to his network of experts, which is key because it's never really just one person in this process. He's also passionate about giving back to his community, donates his time, talents, financial resources to many local organizations. When he's not helping his clients buy and sell real estate, Donnell spends much of his time trying to train his new puppy, Milo. So without further ado, thank you for being with us. Please
Thanks for
share
having me.
your knowledge.
I appreciate it. I don't even know where to start. Thank you for that wonderful introduction. And thank you for having me and for listening to me when you bought your place. If more people would do that, then they would really kind of be setting up that foundation to wealth. And I believe that's what real estate is, right? It is definitely one of the pinnacles and the cornerstone of our financial independence and future. And one of the most important ones, especially when you're looking at a situation like buying multi-unit properties. I think it is a great way to build wealth, especially when you're young. Because when you do that, a lot of us are young and we're living in an apartment anyway, or with a roommate situation, so you can do the hacking thing. So why not kind of take advantage of that, use all of the first time buying programs and go ahead and buy something that's going to continue to appreciate over time. And you're going to have everyone else paying off your mortgage. So 30 years from now, trust me, time does go by. I'm 15 years into my own mortgage. And at some point, it's going to just be paid off. And that's going to be income to you. And it's also going to help set up your financial independence. So, do we have any questions to get started, or should I just kind of go with what I have?
We can jump right on in.
Okay.
Patrice says, hey, from the Motor City. Hey,
Okay, welcome,
Patrice.
Patricia. So it's people all over the world here, huh?
Yes, indeed.
Okay. Every market is different. And as you mentioned, Roz and I am from Virginia, the Tidewater area, where prices are a little bit different than Washington, D.C. So for me, being in financial services, when I moved here in 1996, I did not make a ton of money. So we were four people deep in a small row house in DC. And a friend of mine had this idea to buy one of these 4 unit buildings that are very nondescript, kind of boxy, but they make sense. And when you look at the rents, with DC being an expensive city, it's like you're living in the same neighborhood you would live in anyway, and you're able to collect the rents to help pay your mortgage. And that's what I did. In 2000, I used the NACA program, which I know you all have talked about in the past on your Money Mondays. And I was able to buy a 3 unit apartment building. With that, my mortgage was under $1,600 a month. This was the year 2000, remember? So it was quite a long time ago. But my rents were over $1,400 a month. So I was living on Capitol Hill, 2 blocks from the Metro Union Station, with other 20 somethings paying my mortgage for me, basically. And so by year 2, I increased the rents and I was living rent free. And it was this aha for me. And I wanted to tell everyone else they needed to do the same thing. And so I got a lot of people into it and have developed a little bit of a name for myself with that, which still continues. It's harder now because the DC market is tough and the neighborhoods have transitioned and the property values have shot up. So with all of that, it makes it a little bit more difficult, but we still find a way through all of our different partnerships that we have. So whether it's a multi-unit or buying a row house where you've got some additional bedrooms that you can rent out to friends, I think it's a great way to get started.
Now, in terms of getting started, is it multifamily makes more sense or a single family? Is there something when people are thinking of getting started, one versus another, depending on
Yeah.
the type of landlord that you want to be?
Some of it's going to depend on your own comfort and your buying power, right? As you mentioned, when you buy something that has multiple units, you have multiple systems that you have to maintain. And you also have a little bit more exposure because if you have someone in that unit that's not paying, by and large, you're going to probably have a higher monthly mortgage overall. So when you are doing the financing piece, which is something that I can help with and any great lender can talk to you about, they're going to count some of that rental income towards your qualification. So we don't want you to be in a situation where you have more of a mortgage than you can handle if things go left, like in a pandemic, which we never could have foreseen this happening, right? Um, so we want to be smart about it, but we do want to leverage ourselves, as much as we possibly can so that we can get the highest return over time. So if everything kind of gives you a rate of 5 to 10% return over year, you want to have as much of an investment in that as you possibly can.
Now, if someone's saying, okay, I want to get started, what are some of the first things? Should they go to the bank first and look at numbers? Should they start looking, on
Yeah.
Zillow and Redfin and all those kind of things?
Yeah.
What are kind of the steps one, two, and three if they're saying, yes, this is something I want to do in the next maybe 3 to 6 months?
Absolutely. Usually the first step is going to be finding a qualified real estate agent. You want someone that's knowledgeable about the market, that knows different areas. They see what's about to kind of pop off with development, and that's been doing it for a while, and someone that does it full time. That person, like myself or anyone else that's been doing this for 20 years, is going to have contacts that can help you with everything else. So once I have an idea of what you're looking for, I can put you in touch with the right lender because you might want to buy something that it requires a rehab loan and that's going to be a particular person, or you might want to go through some other first time buyer program, that's going to be a particular lender. So depending on your situation, I can line you up with the right person, and that's really going to be the step because that way you learn about your buying power and your different options so we can develop a strategy to find you the right place.
And you talked a little bit about, okay, doing the lending process, but you also talked about finding a realtor. And there's different realtors, different people who specialize in different things. And I know you talked about someone who does this full time, especially if you're going to be an investor. Tell us why that might be more important, maybe versus if you're just looking for your first time home.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's important in both situations, right? But the people that are fully invested in this and do it full time have access to properties before they come on the market. They have relationships that a part time person might not have. And I have to be available almost 24/7 because real estate is happening all the time. Right now, I have a client in Hawaii that needs to give me a phone call later on tonight. She's 5 hours behind, and we're dealing with a seller who's in Italy. So he's 7 hours ahead. This is not 9 to 5. So I can't be in an office with some government security clearance where I can't have access to my email or my phone. I've got to be immediately available and 100% entrenched in this business.
Now, you make a good point because there are a number of people, and especially right now. So, if you're in a high cost of living area such as Washington, D.C., maybe you're in New York or Chicago or what have you. So, some people are saying, well, goodness, I can't afford here. Maybe I'll buy somewhere else that's a lot less expensive. And so, you're working with someone who's in Hawaii. How are you helping, or what are some of the things to be aware of or ask if you're going to be buying maybe sight unseen or in a market where you don't actually live?
Yeah, that's a good question. So right now we're seeing a lot more of that with the pandemic and just with technology being where it is. I sold a house just in December where the person did not see it until he flew here from South America to actually go and sign on the dotted line. Luckily, he liked it because at that point there was no turning back. But that meant a lot for me. I had to really know the neighborhood and the things that I could point out to him so that I felt comfortable in him making a solid investment and a solid decision. It was a lot of video conferencing from the initial walkthrough to going there with the inspector and even getting estimates for work to be done as well, because of course I offer that service also. So that's a really important piece. And you want to align yourself with someone that understands the market. So there are certain places that I just don't typically work. So if you ask me to find you a house in Woodbridge, Virginia, that's not an area that I know very well. So I'm going to probably refer you to one of my partners, and there are over 1,000 Compass agents in the region. So I can find someone that knows it really, really well. The same way those same agents come to me when we're looking at stuff that's inside the Beltway and in Washington, D.C. So if you align yourself with someone that knows the area, they can make sure that you're on the right track.
Now, what are some questions that if you're a first time investor, and I know so many people are like, oh, I can help you, I can help you, I can help you. What are some questions as you're interviewing realtors to say, okay, this person is actually experienced to help me versus someone else who's saying, no, I can help you. I have my license too.
Right. Yeah. It's a lot more than just having a license because people do that. I think the biggest thing you can do is talk to people and get references. Because if you talk to my past clients, then they have real time experience. And 95% of my business is referral based. And that's because I do an amazing job for my clients. I'm 110% in it with them. Otherwise, they wouldn't share my information with their families and their friends and their colleagues. But they just trip over themselves to make sure that they are putting people with me because they know that they're in the best hands possible. And if you can get 3 references and talk to those people and get real time experience, in different, you want to be at different price points, different neighborhoods, and that sort of thing. So you can really get a good feel for it. I think that's going to be the most important piece. And I can at any time pull up half a dozen people who bought with me 2 and 3 times, even. And that's going to be key.
Now, one thing, especially if you're thinking being an investor, so you probably aren't going to buy in the best of best neighborhoods. You're probably not going to look at the house that looks pristine.
Right.
So, if you're going to be an investor, what are some of the things as you're looking at some of these properties and saying, oh my gosh, this is scary, or maybe the neighborhood is scary? How do you identify what's up and coming in terms of a
Yeah.
neighborhood, but also a property that makes sense to rehab? Because there's definitely some properties, and I'll say when we were looking at properties, there were properties that we went into and I'm like, this is scary. And I know some things like mold, but what are some things to think about in terms of, okay, this neighborhood might not be the most attractive today, but there's potential, or this house might not be the most attractive, but there's potential. How do you identify that?
Yeah, I'm pretty good at that. I tell people my worst quality is probably that I don't see a property for what it is, but what it can be. And I have counseled people to not move forward with properties when I know it's just too much work. But I also can talk them through a lot of minor cosmetic stuff, right? If we've got a good structure and we have what we call good bones, then we can move forward with this and we can kind of, put some lipstick on the pig, so to speak. That's not a problem. And I can help you do that. I can align you with great contractors that can do a quick bathroom renovation and a kitchen update, get the floors done, painted, etc. And sometimes you want to find some things a property where you can do a little bit more over time because a property is not always just what it is right now, but what's the potential? Can we add on to it? Can we put a floor on top? Is there enough land where we can do an addition on the back? That sort of thing. All those things are really important to consider when you're looking at a property, which means that realtor also has to understand zoning regulations. We have to know what's happening in the neighborhood. So that's one of the things where I'm fortunate because I've been doing it for so long and I do work with investors and I have the ear of so many different people that I've sold in neighborhoods. So I know when my investors are calling on me with a project that they're doing 2 years down the road, maybe, right? And they've got a consortium of people and they're buying everything up. And I'm like, okay, boom. So I knew what was happening on Mount Olivet Street before everyone else did, because I knew the investors who were working on that.
And I think that that goes into, we have a question says any success stories. So as you're looking at kind of knowing what's coming, and so
Yeah.
getting to that point, any success stories as you're helping people maneuver and see that potential.
It's so many. That's the thing about my job that's so gratifying. I really do like helping people. And so having someone come back to me after they bought this house and it's doubled in value 7 years later, that's great. Like that's heartwarming. I feel like I'm actually doing something for someone and it makes a difference in their family. There are tons of success stories. You're a success story. You listen to me and every time when I see you, whether it's in Costco or on the phone or what have you, and I'm like, well, how much are your rents now? Well, what's going on? I like cash flow, right? Um, and so my very first sale was actually someone that you've had on here before, one of my dear, dear friends, Channing, and she bought a 4-unit building for $100,000, just over maybe. And at the time, it was a sketchy little neighborhood, but one of the things that we focused on was something that had good bones, and it was close to public transportation. She's only 2 blocks from the metro. And so with that, she was able to do a complete renovation using that NACA product. And so she had a brand new property. So everything's under warranty. So you're not worried about any of the ongoing maintenance items that you might otherwise have to worry about. And you're able to get top dollar on your rent. Well, that was almost 20 years ago, right? That was my first sale. And so she successfully did that. She successfully managed it. And then when she made the decision to go back to school and take a sabbatical, she sold her house in Virginia, moved into that unit, and she's able to live for free off of the rent, basically, that she's generating and lives very well.
And definitely I can also attest to that. And I was telling Donnell when we first connected, I said where my rent was and what I was charging tenants, I'm up $600 in 5 years.
Yeah.
That's per unit.
Per unit.
Per unit.
Important. Per unit.
Unit.
Yeah.
So that's not overall, that's per unit. So definitely, even if you're in a situation where we're in the pandemic and somebody can't pay, I could still pay the mortgage. So that's definitely a positive place to be. And I remember when we were looking at this property, I was like, I don't know. And one thing you said to me, and it stuck with me, he said, "Don't worry, I wouldn't put you anywhere. I wouldn't put my sister." And
Oh.
so that was a connection because I'm like, I don't know. I don't know if you like your sister. But the numbers made sense. Everything from the rent made sense to the amount of money from a construction perspective made sense. The quick return, and I charged myself rent for 2 months of $300. And then I realized, wait, I mean, I was paying the mortgage off these tenants, so
Yeah.
I'm gonna stop paying rent. So I paid in these 5 years or almost 6 years, I paid $600 in rent those
That's
2 months.
amazing. That's amazing. People can't say that. And you live in Washington, D.C., with all this development popping up. And now you're 6 years into your mortgage. So it's being paid down by other people. So that's going to become an asset in retirement that's going to continue to cash flow. Who needs Social Security?
Exactly. I'll take that too, though. But
Yeah. I want
but
all my.
I want all where the money resides. Carmen asks, how can she buy and renovate an investment property if she doesn't have the cash to come out of pocket? How can the FHA loan be leveraged for investment properties?
The FHA loan is a great product because they have the 203K. So depending upon where you are, Carmen, there are different loan limits in different places, and there are different limits based on how many units it is. If it's a single family home, it's one limit, 2, 3 units, up to 4. You can't obviously do more than 4 units. It becomes a commercial property at that point. They still only require 3.5% down, which is great. But you do have the FHA mortgage insurance the entire time that you have that product. But it can be an awesome way to get into the property. And then over time, you can refinance if interest rates stay low and drop that mortgage insurance. So 3.5%, and the seller can pay some of your closing costs, which is great. That's a great way to get into something.
And Shannon says, can you explain the 203K? And I actually use the 203K as well. I did not go through the NACA program. And so it is within FHA, which makes life a lot easier. But you do get to roll those construction costs in as well.
Right.
Do you want to go into a little bit more about, because Carmen says she's not eligible for NACA. I don't think I was eligible for NACA, and I didn't want to go through that long timeline either. So the 203K is a lot easier, quicker, simpler. You want to say a little
Yeah.
bit more about that?
Absolutely. And Fannie Mae has a home path product as well, where sometimes you can put down 5% and still roll in your renovation costs. So if you find something, let's say it's a 4-unit building and it's $500,000, but it needs $50,000 worth of work, you can roll that into your loan amount. And so now your sales price it's all going to be based on the acquisition price plus your renovation costs. So you would be putting down your 3.5% based on that total. So we'll say 550,000. The 50,000 for the renovation costs goes into a separate account that you're able to draw on with your contractor. And there's also some oversight. There's a 203K consultant that's making sure you're not getting ripped off, the work is done appropriately, everything's permitted, etc. They can be a little bit more costly. There's a bit more risk involved because the appraiser is looking at an after improved value. So the idea being that the property is going to actually be worth a little bit more once you put this sweat equity into it. And so hopefully if you're putting in 50,000 instead of it being the 550 your acquisition cost, maybe it's worth 575 or 600.
And that's key. But I think one thing you said too is key, which most people might not be aware of, is on day one you look at this property, it's worth $400,000 or $500,000, but you're saying, goodness, if I could only put in 100,000, it would be worth 8.
Right.
And so you want a lender who's going to be able to take that into account, because one, you might not qualify for $800,000 off your income alone, but if they can take into account those after improvement rents as well. So those kind of things are going to be key as you go through the approval process. And I'll tell you, if you're anything like me, I was like, okay, I don't care. That's a lot of money. That's a big mortgage payment. And I remember we looked at one property, and as we started adding up, renovation costs and all these kind of things, and I was like, we're not getting to that second comma. Like, I can't stomach it. I'm not ready for it. And so you want to make sure that you're working with someone too, because your realtor should be able to talk through what the cost might be to renovate. So if you do a new kitchen, if you do a new bathroom, and start adding those numbers up in your head, because some realtors are going to be like, oh, okay, you do this, this, and this, you'll be good to go, but they really can't help you, or maybe they can't direct you somewhere that you can actually get those things done, because they can be overwhelming. And I know for me, it's easy to say you want to do everything, and I know like Shannon did everything, and I did some things, because sometimes you can do too much and get in over your head. Or if you're in a place like DC, and I've been to the zoning process more times than I would like to. I hope I never see those people. It can be too much, because most people, this is not your full-time job. So you're a part-time investor, and you don't want to take on so much construction that it becomes your full-time job.
Right, right. And you don't want to hate this property after the fact. And so, in a lot of my background also, I have renovated properties and basically flipped them, renovated them to sell. So I have the contractors, I've done the work. I can tell you what it costs to do a kitchen and a bathroom, put a roof on, redo floors, etc. So I bought enough HVAC systems where I know what they cost, brand by brand. So we're good there.
Ia says it can be a heavy process. Yes, girl.
It can, it can. And really with
You have to go from
anything,
wine to hard liquor easily.
right. You have to prioritize your list, right? I think you did that. You're like, what do I have to do now? And then it's other stuff you do later on down the road, right? You create your wish list and you work towards it.
And definitely one thing too, because I bought a multifamily, I decided the nicer unit would be mine. So I spent the most in mine, and then I got everybody else good, and I
Right.
wanted to be great. So that could be something that you do too, and then you work through it, because you'll have, the comforts that you want in yours, and you do
Right.
enough to get your mortgage paying tenants in there. And then as you turn the units, you can do a little bit more also. Alicia
Absolutely.
says, what's the general rule of thumb on what to charge for rent? Is it 10% of the mortgage or value of the home? Is it the cost of rent? Also factoring in HOA fees, property taxes, homeowners insurance? Or is that even realistic? Or are you basing the taxes on rental comps on, or basing the rents on rental comps in your area?
You're always going to be looking at rental comps. We have a little saying in real estate that value is a moment in time. So right now, rental rates are higher kind of across the board, especially when you're talking about places that have multiple bedrooms and some outdoor space. People are paying a little bit more than they would, and they're paying more than they would normally for like just a one bedroom apartment. So there's no rule of thumb for that. What I always tell my clients is think like you're the renter. Who is your audience? Go on Craigslist, go on Zillow, go on whatever website it is, and actually look for these properties that are going to be in the same neighborhood and of similar size. Make an appointment, go and tour them, and then figure out how to be the best value of all of them.
And then we have another question. What upcoming changes do you see in the DC market?
DC is on fire. DC is on fire. And so people are always asking me, well, what's the next neighborhood to pop off? And like a lot of it depends on how much you have to spend and what you're comfortable with. There are kind of east of Trinidad and that Carver Langston area. When you walk around that neighborhood or drive around that neighborhood, you're going to see a construction site on every single block. I know a lot of developers that are over there. They're putting their money together. They bought stuff from me 4 years ago that they're holding on to and doing assemblages. It's going to be a completely different space. So I've been selling over there like crazy lately because I think it is just the next place to truly pop off. Also, Lily Ponds is a fantastic neighborhood of single family homes. And when you go over there, you can walk to the Anacostia River. You don't even feel like you're in DC. So there's these little pockets that are real gems that people don't quite know about. If you get outside of DC, you can go to the neighborhoods on the outskirts like Hyattsville and Cheverly, also huge. So a lot of it depends on what you're looking for. But then there are some neighborhoods that I think are a little overvalued because they've been hyped up by development. Like Anacostia, the prices are way up. I think that they still have room to go, but I don't think it's the same value that it once was.
Now, that's a good thing too, is you're thinking about how do you determine what's overvalued or what would be a deal. And of course, we wouldn't be privy to all the information that you do. We don't know who's buying and who's
Yeah.
holding. We see abandoned houses in a neighborhood, and you're like, goodness, it's just an abandoned house, but maybe it's some investor that's sitting on it until they can do something bigger. What are some of the signs as you're driving through a neighborhood to say, oh, wait, this is a good one, or this is a great opportunity? What are some of those signs to look for?
Right. I mean, real estate's still always about location, right? So there are certain things you're going to want to that are going to be paramount wherever you are, right? So access to public transportation. In DC, we have the subway system. That's important. You also want to be in a neighborhood, ideally, that has good public schools, because if that's an option for people, people are always going to be drawn to buy there and to rent. And then you're looking for places that have development happening or even development opportunity. So I've been here for 24 years. So all of these neighborhoods that are kind of right off of these main commercial areas like H Street or U Street, Georgia Avenue, there's been so much potential along those corridors that was completely untapped. And we're seeing it happen. And President Biden just went to Call Your Mother bagel place yesterday or the day before. So on Georgia Avenue, when I sold over there 5 years ago to a client who just made $200,000 when she sold her condo with me, I told her, I was like, this is going to be a great investment for you. And I knew she was only going to stay for a short period of time. And that's walking distance from that condo. That neighborhood is on fire right now. Also overpriced, in my opinion, because the houses are about $1 million. You know, so you've got to look for those sorts of things. It's really about the potential of the neighborhood, especially in a neighborhood that doesn't have any more land, to be built upon.
Now, Carmen wants to know what are some lessons you learned from your flipping experiences?
Whew. I mean, there's always, you have to have a contingency fund because there's always something. I think going back, I would just never take any shortcut at the end of the day. And sometimes the biggest thing to know when you're flipping is you make your money in the beginning. So if the numbers don't work, like people are always talking about kind of a range or what I can sell it for. If you have to sell it at the top of the range in order to make money, it's not a good investment. So like if that happens, that's great, but you need to buy it at the right price up front. That's where you make your money, when you actually purchase and acquire the property.
And I think that's huge too. So, in terms of figuring out those numbers, I think for most of us, especially if you're anything like me, super conservative, I am like debt adverse. I'm definitely like, let me crunch the numbers. Could I pay all this debt on my own if nobody paid their rent? Those kind of things. And so, if you're a little fearful, if you're a little concerned, how do you help people kind of get off the fence? Um, and understand and make those numbers make sense. I mean,
Right.
as we were talking, and I'm like, I don't know, because I will tell you the number that I went to Donnell with was about 250 less than what I spent. Or 250, yeah, 250 less than what I actually spent. And so how do you help people kind of get through that? Because
Right.
I know if you would have told me that number in the very beginning, I
Yeah.
probably would have hung up and blocked your number and said, don't call
Right.
me.
And I didn't. Right. I was like, okay, let me show you what you say you want to get. But at the end of the day, I'm also going to listen to you and I'm going to show you what you actually need to have because you want to be here today having this story. Right. And so we slowly educate people in that process overall. Um, I guess there's it costs what it costs. And if the cash flow makes sense, then it makes sense. There are definitely going to be some folks that are more conservative. I'm in the middle. I'm like, we got to roll the dice a little bit because what are the chances that you're going to be left high and dry where everybody in your property is not paying rent and you have to cover it? You might have to come down on the rent. So, but it's not going to be a situation where there's no one else that's paying rent at all. And so realistically, you probably just have to be a little uncomfortable in real estate because there is some risk involved to some extent. We want to be smart with it. And that's why we buy a quality product that we can rent and that's in a good location and that hopefully has some appreciation over time. But there's definitely going to be some rent and some risk. And I'm sure you were uncomfortable sometimes. It happens, right? We all are. But that's what happens when we get these big rewards, also.
Now, you alluded to it a little bit in the beginning about your team. So, we're assembling the team, and most people are like, yes, we know we got to go to the bank. We got to finance this thing from somewhere. We know we
Mhm.
need a realtor, but I don't know if everyone is aware of kind of all the people that are a part of the team. Who are some other people that are a part of the team?
Right. Yeah, we have tons of vendors that we use. The first person we bring in is the lender, right? They're going to work with us to make sure that you know your buying power and all of your different options. We also have to have a really quality home inspector. I was just with your inspector, Warwick, last week working on something. He's fantastic. So, and that's important because you want someone that's going to tell you what's wrong with the place without just being a complete alarmist. But you want to have the information. Like, don't gloss over it. Give me worst case scenario so that I can be prepared for that. And if that doesn't happen, then we're all happy. Um, we also are going to have settlement companies that we work with. And a lot of people think that's not important, but the settlement company doesn't work for the buyer or the seller. They really represent the contract and they make sure that all parties kind of meet all of their terms that are within the contract and that we get to a successful settlement. But it's important to have someone that knows how to look over the title work, make sure that there aren't any clouds on your title. These houses in DC are old. And so there could be some unreleased lien, some deceased person, some trust that wasn't recorded properly, et cetera. We want all that buttoned up just right so that when you get the property, you don't have any issues with it.
Now, you've gotten the property, we figured out the financing and all those kind of things. and now you're a landlord. So there are, of course, the two different kinds of landlords. There are the landlords who are off site. So maybe you're buying in another place. I remember me when I first started as a landlord, it was by chance because I moved for work in the middle of the housing crisis in 2009 and couldn't sell my home.
Right.
So I became a landlord by force, not necessarily by choice. And I was in a whole nother state. And so for those type of landlords, what are some of the things to be aware of or some of the things to help them be more successful?
Yeah, you really have to just arm yourself with the right team in that perspective, which is going to be different. Some people will get what's a home warranty that kind of covers pretty much everything in your property mechanically, your electrical, your plumbing, your HVAC, etc. So if something happens, you make one phone call, they dispatch someone out, you can have your tenant meet that contractor to get it fixed. Most of the time, if you have a good handyman, that's going to take care of 75% of your issues. You can pay a property management company 7 to 10% to collect your rent for you and pay you late, or you can just do it on your own, especially now with all the different electronic payment options that we have. And make sure that you have a good handyman and a good contractor on speed dial, someone that you trust that you can get over there within a moment's notice. Because usually, as a landlord, the only thing you're doing is opening a door. Like you're not climbing under a sink and so you're not unstopping the toilet, you're not fixing a roof, you're not doing any of that stuff. So if you have a good handyman and then a good contractor you're aligned with, that takes care of most of your needs because a property that's not kind of wet functioning properly is not one that's going to get you any money. And so I always prioritize fixing anything that's wrong and keeping the tenants happy.
And then, so on the other side of things, if you're going to be living in your property, so if you're going to be doing the house hacking and so forth, what are some things to be aware of to make you a good landlord in that respect?
Yeah, and I did that. With my first property, I lived there and I decorated it and it was wonderful and I would make cookies and all this other stuff. But, at the end of the day, I just wanted my money on the first, on time, no problems. But a lot of it is really just being in communication with people and being quick to respond to any sort of issues. So it's the same. But if you are on site, I would treat it like my own house and I would try to fix it on my own first. I hired a lot of people to come out and have one little tool that took them 2 minutes to fix something, and I had to pay them $100. So, now we're in a different situation. You can Google anything, find it on YouTube. Most things you can fix as a homeowner on your own. If somebody's heat or air conditioning is not working, the first step is to make sure the filter's been changed because quite often it hasn't and it's dirty and that's why it's not working. So,
And that's one thing too. I know Shannon talked about this a few Money Mondays ago about like boundaries as well. So you're baking cookies. I don't bake anything. Now I'm like, maybe I'm not a great landlord. I'm like, I haven't given them anything. But what are some of the things to one be a great landlord? And I'm in another landlord group, and I know they talked about gift cards for Christmas and all these things. So where does a good kind of fine line between being nice and
uh-huh.
not letting it be to the point where we're pals and maybe they'll say I'm not paying rent because
Oh,
you
right.
know whatever.
Yeah. Right. If you're gonna have them over, don't have them over till after the 5th of the month. How about that? That's good. Yeah, I think Channing and I are different people in that way. I am probably a little bit more open. I would have people over to my apartment and everything when I was living on site. But business is business. And so, yes, we're friends and I might know about what's going on personally. But if you have not gotten the rent paid by the 5th, nothing personal, but I have to go ahead and file for eviction. I'm sure you're going to clear it up and this will go away. But we got to do what we have to do. Business is business.
Shannon says she gives a nice move-in note and a plant. I give them a neighborhood directory.
Hey,
some great restaurants and so
yeah,
forth in the area, but
yeah,
that's about it. So you can
everyone's
do
different.
either.
Yeah. Now, I will say one thing where I probably have differed in the past is like if somebody they don't cause me any problems, they don't ever need anything to be fixed, and they pay their rent on time, I usually will not increase that person's rent or it'll be very nominal because I realize that that's a bird in hand and I wouldn't want to have to replace that tenant because every time you do it, you're rolling the dice. You never know what you're going to get. So if it's the difference between me getting an extra 50 or $100 a month, I'll just let them stay. Like, why have them move out? Then I have to repaint the place and relist it to try and get a little bit more money, but I don't know who I'm dealing with.
I think that's a really good point, especially if you're in a high rent area. So if you're in, I know some areas on the West Coast, definitely if you're in DC or what have you. I mean, rents are going up so doggone quickly. Like I said, I'm up significantly, but usually my rents go up as we turn apartments
Right.
versus every single year. And so I know some people are like, well, goodness, how long do you wait? No, I wouldn't keep a tenant 5 years probably at the same rent, but I'd probably go up maybe a lot less, maybe $25 or $40, something so small that it would be an inconvenience for them to leave
Right.
versus this small amount of money.
Absolutely.
And so that was definitely like a great thing in terms of kind of chasing it. But and then things like problem tenants. Um, and so I've had only, thank goodness, only a few. Um, but I know I've called you and I'm like, I need her out, hasn't started, whatever the excuse might be. I had a tenant who said that she had to pay for her child's middle school graduation party. So that's why she didn't have her rent money. And so in
So
terms
now
of
you
like,
paid for her child's middle school graduation party. Okay.
so like how to talk through, walk through, be prepared for it. I always say some tenants are going to try you, some tenants will never give you any issue at all, and some tenants will try you every single month. How to prepare for that? I mean, emotionally, financially.
Yeah.
Make sure you don't knock on their door and say, "What is it? A package outside again? And you don't have my rent money?" So, how to prepare for those kind of conversations?
Yeah, I think you can't take it personally for one, and you have to keep it business as usual, right? And I think you keep the lines of communication open. I'm a pretty good judge of character. I can tell when somebody's shucking and jiving and, when they're really being honest about something. But at the end of the day, this is a business enterprise. And if you are not paying your rent, then you have to go because you've become a liability. And so I'm going to go through all the proper channels. I'm not going to waste any time. I think that is the biggest issue that landlords have is they keep giving people time. You can file for eviction and you as a landlord can change your mind at any time, right? But if there's a timeline like there is in DC, you want to get that clock started. So if the rent was due on the first, late after the fifth, on the sixth, I'm filing for eviction and I believe you and I'm praying for you that you're going to be able to pay me and that this will all be in the past. But to be clear, in 30 days, your time is going to be out.
Now, you mentioned a good judge of character, and depending on how you find your tenants, of course, if you have a property management company, sometimes they don't care if it's a good tenant or not. They just need somebody in to get paid. Um, but how do you, especially if you're a landlord and you're going to do your own vetting and
Mhm.
your own tenant searches? Some of the things, of course, we're pulling their credit and so forth, but what are some things to look for to decide one tenant versus another?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I think what helps me with that is one, I was in management before when I was in banking. And so I had to deal with a lot of people and hiring folks. But two, I was in banking. So I saw how people handled their money. And the person that makes $25,000 a year might always have money in their bank account, where the person that makes $200,000 a year is always overdrawn. I recently had someone that applied to rent out my basement, and he didn't have terrible credit, but he had really, really good income, especially considering the price point of the apartment. And something was just off for me. And I was like, well, send me your bank statements. Every bank statement, he was overdrawn by anywhere from $600 to $1,000 when his paycheck came in. And his paychecks would come in and they would be $2,700. So the bank was like, great, he's a good risk. We'll pay all these checks and these ATM fees, and they're probably making $1,000 off of him each month on fees. But I was like, you're not going to run me like that. I know your checks are going to bounce, and there's something else to that story. So I have been a big proponent of having people send me their bank statements because I think it tells you a lot about how they run their business. And if you see red flags there, you're going to see it later on with them paying you. So that's another thing that you can do to vet them outside of their just standard credit history.
And I love it too, especially depending on the type of tenant. So one tenant I had was a bartender, and so their
Mhm.
checks were very low,
Right.
but they brought home a lot of cash every night.
Yeah.
So I would see those deposits. So it was a great thing. But especially in the midst of this pandemic, there are going to be some people who are going to be looking to move because they haven't paid rent in
Mhm.
X number of months. And so you could also ask for verification of rent payments. So, regardless of how they pay it, if they pay it with a check, I need to see it on the bank statement. If they pay it through a PayPal, a Venmo, an app, whatever it is, I need to see that and see the date. Is it the
Right.
first? Is it the 17th, the 20th?
Right.
2 months later, whatever that is. I had someone who said that they were renting from their grandmother. And I'm like, well, make sure your grandmother sends me a note that's notarized. And I guess Granny wouldn't lie for them. 'Cause never got that note from
Right.
their grandmother to show that they were paying, and they could never show me on a bank statement that this little check, whatever it was going to their grandmother. So don't be afraid to ask for a little bit extra. I know some people are like, ugh, a bank statement. Well, if everything doesn't line up, you can say, well, I want this extra. And just remember, it's expensive to get a tenant out. It's emotionally expensive. It's
Right.
financially expensive to get a tenant out. So if I have to go another week or whatever to get a
Yeah.
tenant, a good quality tenant, don't be afraid to ask for that information and know kind of where their money is going and where their priorities are too.
Right. And you have to protect your asset, right? So, I mean, because even once you get them out, you don't want to have it all banged up and the stove is so dirty you have to replace it and everything else. So, not judging them just based on their money to say they would do that, but you never know. If you're not taking care of your finances, you're not going to take care of my property.
So we're checking their credit, we're pulling the pay stubs, we might be asking for the bank statements. Anything else we should ask for?
References for sure. And I call references. And because now you can do so much looking people up online with social media, their reverse lookups, everything else. So I can call and find out if this is really your old boss or your old landlord or if it's just your friend. So, and I get the references because when they stop responding to me, I'm going to be reaching out to these people if, worst comes to worst.
What are some good reference questions? I always ask, would you rent to this person? And usually, I've had some people that are like, it's like, okay, that's a no.
Yeah, that's a
If you don't immediately say yes, that's a no.
right. Right. I will usually ask them instead of asking like when if they were ever late, I would be like, when do they normally pay their rent? Like the tenant I have right now pays his rent between the 22nd and the 25th of the month prior. So I love that. Like you don't have to do anything else for me but pay me early. We are good to go. So I mean, I think that's an important thing because they ever pay late. If they don't owe them money, they'll probably be like, no, they don't pay late. But when do they actually pay their rent? Is it the 8th of the month? Like, how does this go? Am I the first to be paid or the last to be paid? And I would ask them what sort of renovations they had to do to the property when the person moved out, if any, because there are some tenants that will leave it meticulously, and there are some that leave it as a pigsty, which I'm sure you know. And you have to go in there and clean up behind them and then take it out of their security deposit.
Now that's a good point too. So when you think about turning an apartment, there's paint, there's cleaning. As you're estimating that, and I always, bring that back in terms of if you're estimating that cost, that gives you the idea if you should raise the rent or try and keep this tenant. How long should you try and keep them, and how long should it take in order to turn an apartment? What are some things to think about there? So whether it be an apartment or a house, what's the timeline to think of? So this person moves out on the 31st. Could you have somebody in there on the first? How much should you be expected to pay? those kind of things?
Usually you can't. So it's going to take some time to turn it, which is another reason why you have to have great contractors at your disposal. Because if my tenant moves out on the 31st, I want somebody in there painting 7 o'clock on the 1st. And I want enough people in there where that house or apartment is completely done within 2 or 3 days. And it's going to cost you, I say as a rule of thumb, at least the amount of the monthly rent is what it's going to cost you. And it's going to take you about a week of downtime to, by the time you have it painted, have every little thing fixed, if anything, and you get it cleaned, it's going to be almost a week that you're down.
I will say I have turned an apartment in less than 24 hours.
Sure. Did you have to paint it?
I had it painted. They painted overnight. I paid them a little extra to come through and paint
You
it
have.
overnight.
That's something.
But I've known them for a while. I've used them a number of times. They were between jobs, and this was a great time for them to. I think they came in maybe 3, 4 o'clock. They stayed up until maybe 1, 2 o'clock in the morning. We ran the heat, dropped paint, and come on in and move on in. So that worked out to my benefit definitely. But then too, so you're turning this apartment. You're getting ready to find your tenants. Where should you be listing your apartments to find good tenants? And
Mhm.
then that listing as well. So the photos, how to get good photos, how to get a
Mhm.
good description. You actually wrote my description for me and I still use it.
Fantastic. I love
So how to get those things so that you can actually list your property in a way to get the best rent from them.
Yeah, I believe that more information is better. So if you just have a couple of lines of text and 3 or 4 pictures, they're passing right through, right? I sell real estate and I know that people respond. They want to see every angle of every single room and the pictures need to be professional. And you only have to shoot the pictures really one time and then you're good. It doesn't even have to be the exact unit as long as it's representative of the unit. And you get pay a photographer to come in that might charge you a couple $300 and you get a really good set of pictures and you can use those probably for 5 to 10 years. You get a lot of information letting them know exactly what's nearby, what's walkable, what's in the neighborhood. A lot of people want to know that there are, expensive condos that are turning around. There's a coffee shop, there's a yoga studio. All that stuff is really, really important. What's the distance to 8th Street, to the metro, to shopping? All of those things are really important. So I give them as much information as I possibly can. Craigslist is a great place to post. It will usually go out to other places like Zillow. I find a lot of tenants are looking on Zillow. In order to get it on the realtor multiple listing system, you have to be willing to pay a commission to the listing broker and the tenant's broker as well. And so that usually costs you 1 month's rent. Sometimes it can be worthwhile if you want to kind of expand your audience, but a lot of times people don't want to pay that money. So it depends on the price point also if it's worth it to you. I find it's better with single family houses and townhouses than it is with apartments.
And so, how do you, especially on the apartments, because every time a realtor calls me and they're like, I can find a tenant for you, I'm like, I ain't paying. Um, so, how do you know from a numbers perspective, is it if it's worth it, especially if you have an apartment to use a realtor?
You know, I I just don't know why you would do it if you have to. I really don't. I mean, it comes down to your time. So, like, if you're not around and you want someone that's going to be able to show it and have open houses and all of that, then you do it. I just did a rental for a client of mine. I don't usually do rentals, but they had a townhouse in Bowie, and we got the professional pictures done. We did everything, and it was really advantageous because I was able to reach a segment of the marketplace that she wouldn't have been able to reach on her own, and I was able to then manage it in a professional manner, and she never could have done this. We had over 100 inquiries in a weekend, and we had 30 people who applied for the property sight unseen during COVID. So I went through and we qualified everyone and we picked the top 3 people. So she only had 3 people coming through her house instead of 100. And then we were actually able to work them against each other to get a higher monthly rent. So in the end, I paid my own fee. right? Because she's
That's
making that up.
big.
Yeah, after by the time the first year's lease is done, she will have paid that fee, and then she'll have that ongoing because it's a long-term lease. So, I mean, that's a situation where it makes sense. And if you're looking at a house, especially a nice house, you probably want to get a different type of clientele in there.
Now, that's one thing you brought up too. So, the lease. So, most people are on the standard 1 year lease. Is there going to be something that we should take into account if we're going to do a 2 year lease, 3 year, 4 year lease, those kind of things?
Yeah, I'm really open to doing that with someone that has longevity in their job. So I feel like if they just started a new job and they just moved here, I might not want them on a long-term lease like that. But if I see that they're in the same job for a while and they have a lot of stability and all other factors, I think it would be great to have a multi-year lease.
And then, so if things take a turn for the worse
Hmm.
and we have to get to the point of eviction, we've given them nice little notices and hey, I'm headed on downtown. You can
Right.
meet me there with the check or or you'll get this paperwork. What are some things as we're walking through this process? And I'm sure tenants are probably getting to the point where they're like, I'm not answering your calls, your emails, those kind of things, to make sure that all of your ducks are in a row. Because I don't know if everyone is aware of kind of all the ins and outs, depending on where you are. And I
Right.
see often a lot of bad advice about, oh, you could just kick them out, you could just do this. And depending on where you are, you might actually have things in your lease that are against the law.
Right. Yeah.
Which are
Yeah.
issues as well. So, like, for example, I'll tell you in DC, they changed the max of your late fee. And so that was something to like go in there and revise the document. But if you have to get to that point, what are some of the steps? I mean, in my opinion, it's one of the times where you should probably get a professional, but I mean, maybe you can do some of the parts on your own. What are some things to be aware of in that respect?
I always say hire an attorney. It's expensive, but the time and the aggravation that they save you is completely worth it. Because if you make one misstep, not only do you have to start over, but sometimes you could be fined. You know, DC specifically is very tenant friendly. So if you do anything wrong, say the wrong thing, don't notify them properly, etc., you're done. And a good attorney is going to try to get this to be worked out in mediation and figure out what the other party, the tenant, wants to try and get this resolved and get them out of your property. And they take the emotion out of it, right? It's just about business. And it's hard to not take it personally and for there not to be some emotion, but you got to get it out of there so that you can get on to your next tenant that is going to pay you money.
And I think that's big. It's hard not to be emotional because this is your money, your property. You've sacrificed something to get in there. I know one thing, I started the process with a tenant and I was going through the documents. And one thing in DC, it has to be in English and in Spanish, regardless if they don't even speak Spanish. And I don't speak Spanish. And I'm in there trying to fill out this document
Wow.
in on the Spanish form.
Yeah.
And I was like, Google Translate.
Yeah,
and
I didn't even know that.
and so that's when we start talking about these different pieces, you're like, okay, this might be, and the attorney isn't going to be cheap, but yet and still, if you want to get somebody out, and if you end up with a professional tenant who they know how to game the
Right.
system and make this last 6 7 8 months of non-payment, and I know a few
Mhm.
landlords who have done that. It's definitely not advantageous. So I've had conversations where you had to talk me off because I'm like, I'm gonna knock on their door. And
Right.
you can't knock on their
We've
door.
all done that. And we learned from it. We learned from it. But it's hard. It's hard.
So as we get to the yes, Shannon, I was like, yeah, I'm about to show up. But anything as you're getting prepared, we talked about the team, we talked about the first initial steps.
Mhm.
I mean, we talked about the fear, which that's something that you definitely have to kind of work through. I say make sure you have kind of a group too. So you have a few landlords that some people
Yeah.
that you can talk through the emotional part. And it might be hard because depending on your circle, you might be the first person that's getting an investment property. And
Mhm.
you're like, oh my God, like this is a lot of money. You might not want to tell your family how much you're about to spend or how much money you have at your disposal, but you want to get your ducks in a row and start the process.
Right.
And it's never going to be easy to write that check or to sign on the dotted line and say, yes, I'll pay back $500,000.
Mhm.
And you're sitting there with $20,000 in your bank account or whatever it might be. So that may or may not be easy, but definitely those first steps are imperative. But in kind of closing, as we kind of summarize how to get started and get off the ledge, because I know it's not, probably some people that are watching this that have been saying they're going to do this for the last 5 or 6 years,
Mhm.
and they keep seeing prices go up and up and up.
Right.
So, what are some of the things as we talk about just getting started, getting there, kind of helping? We have somebody says, "That's me." Yeah. So, what are some of the things just to help people get started, get prepared? So, if they're saying by summer of 2021, I'm going to be a landlord, what do they
Yep.
need to do in the next 30, 60 days?
They need to find a competent realtor and they need to find a lender. And I think if you have those two parties engaged, they're going to drag you down that road. Because once you tell me what you want to do and you tell me the timeline, I'm going to definitely make sure that we're going to get you where you need to be by the timeline and tell you what we have to do. Now, if you decide 3 months from now that you no longer want to do it and your plans have changed, that's on you. But otherwise, we're going to do it. And once you're pre-approved and you know exactly what you need to do, so you either have enough money or you need to save some more money. It's one of the two. You're either ready or you're not. So if you're ready, we're going to do it. And then if you're aligned with the right realtor, then even if you're not actively looking, if they find something that would work for you, then they're going to put it in front of you. And that might be the thing that makes you act and get off the fence because it's just really easy. And those sorts of things do happen quite often. So
And then how do you know your list of things that you're looking for? So you might be looking for something that you're going to house hack and you're like, well, I don't know what's most important. I just want the numbers to work, but something has
mhm.
to be important. How do you put together that list of what's going to be most important?
I try to figure out how you see yourself living. Do you see yourself living in an apartment with several others? Do you see yourself in a household with roommates? Maybe we find something where you're renting the main house and you live in the basement. That's a great option that a lot of people like to do. If I have a colleague on my team who just did that, he bought a row house in DC. He lives in the basement and he put all his roommates upstairs. So it's not a legal multi unit, but he has his own separate living space and they're all upstairs. I can ask the questions to figure out what it is that you want and hopefully present you with some options that you hadn't even thought about. And then we can determine based on your buying power and what sort of lifestyle you want, what neighborhoods offer that product so we can go after it.
I think that's a great thing. We have somebody who says, so Shannon says, one, she says Nextdoor has a great landlord group. And Nextdoor, if you're not familiar with it, it's an app, and I think they're probably nationwide at this point in time, but you can put in where you live and you can join groups now. So you can be in that landlord group. They're going to share issues, concerns. I had a tenant that's having this issue. Maybe it's you're looking for a good HVAC person, those kind of people. So that's a great thing to join as well. And you can join before you're an actual landlord so you can kind of see what's going on. And if you're looking in a certain neighborhood, you can see what issues are in that particular neighborhood as well. And then we have a question about how can we find you?
Yeah, if you need me, I'm easy to email. I'm Donnell at compass.com. That's Donnell at compass, COMPASS.com. And of course, you can always call me or text me. Very easy to Google me and find me, but my number's 202-361-1181.
And it's in the group chat too. So if you all
Oh,
want to
perfect.
contact Donnell, reach out to him. Definitely call, text. I've sent a number of like, hey, I just want to know, do you know
I'm
when
happy
the
to
first time it snowed, do you know somebody that shovels?
help. That's
I
something
think
you
the
don't
first
think
time
about.
I was like, no, I'm gonna do it myself. And then after I did
Right.
it myself, I was like, actually. You
You
know
don't have to
somebody.
do that.
Well, perfect. Well, ladies, if you don't have any more questions, I want to thank you so much for joining us. This is a huge part when we talk about growing your wealth, when we talk about being at a point where you can create passive income, and real estate can be passive or active. It really depends on how much you want to be a part of the process. But oftentimes we get ready for our first property. Your first property could be your first investment property as well.
Mhm.
And so you want to get to the point where you get from the talking or the concept stage to the action. And sometimes it's going from just telling your homegirl to actually calling a realtor. And I'll tell you, I was at a point, I was under contract. I was about to close, and Donnell called me and told me my house burned a week before closing. And I remember getting off the phone with him, driving over to see the house. It sure enough burned. I called him back and I said, "This was too much. I'm exhausted. I am emotionally drained. Don't call me again for 6 months." I think 60 days later, he was like, "I want you to meet me somewhere." And so when he says you will probably need somebody to, move you and know what you're looking for and assist you, because the process can be long and you want to make sure that you have someone who understands investment properties, because if not, you can get in over your head. You can end up doing more renovation than, and I always go back, then you can emotionally take on or financially take on as well. And sometimes you need someone just to remind you that this is an investment property. This
Yep.
doesn't have to be your forever home. This may be a property you never even live in. So you don't want to overdo it for this investment property. And now you're sitting on this property because you've thrown so much money in as well. So I want to make sure that you all use my favorite resource as well. So definitely reach out to Donnell if you need anything. And if you have any questions along the way, I'm happy to answer questions. We've had Shannon that has been a part and answered a few questions along the way, and she's in the group. So definitely you can reach out to her as well. So Shannon said her favorite too. So definitely, if you have any questions, please let us know. We want to help you along the way, and I hope to see more homeowners by the end of this year. Thank you
Yes.
so
Love it.
much.
Thank
Be
you for
sure to
having me.
join
I
us again
appreciate it.
next Monday. Thank you.
All right. Take care.